Hi and welcome to Chess TV. Now we are finally back from the summer break during which we could celebrate Chess TV's 8th birthday in August. The first episode of Chess TV ever was aired on the 2nd of August 2004 and we have so far produced and aired 382 episodes. This season will actually be slightly different from what Chess TV has looked like before. During 8 years we have produced and aired one new episode every week. But that will change now, so from now on there will be one new episode every month. We will therefore, from today, air one new episode at each beginning of each month. Otherwise there will be no major changes in Chess TV. We have of course Professor Arne Johansson who recovers chess historical curiosities, and we also have the opening school with Alfred and Adriana. Albert presents his observations on the relationship between chess and Machiavelli's theory of power. And so we, of course, have a chess puzzle with checkmate in 3 moves. But before we kick off with the opening school, I thought I'd draw your attention to Turkey and Istanbul, where the 40th Chess Olympic is currently underway until the 10th of September. The chess world's creme de la creme have all come together to defend each nation's honor and claim the Chess Olympic gold. World champion Anand, however, shines with his absence and is instead staying on Hawaii with his wife Aruna and 16-month-old son Akil. But no stay, not even on glorious Hawaii, becomes chess-free for the world champion who took the opportunity to visit and motivate participants at a local chess tournament for students. And speaking of chess families, a new documentary on the Polgar family has been produced about the more different upbringing their father developed and tested on the 3 sisters. The Polgar sisters are now 3 prominent chess players, with Judith Polgar in the lead, and we can definitely recommend you to at least take a look at the trailer for the documentary, which you can find if you Google Polgar trailer for chess space. So let's hand it over to the opening school with Adriana and Alfred, because even though it might be a little too late for many of you to become as good as the Polgars, you always have to take every chance you can get. So here comes the first one. Here we go. Welcome back to the opening school. We hope you've truly enjoyed your summers and are ready to get back to work, as it's once again time for us to dive headfirst into opening theory. After 7 years of Chess TV, we thought we'd change some things up. From now on, Chess TV and the opening school will only come out once a month with a new episode. Hopefully this will make it possible for us to make the show better in lots of ways. More than that, we're also going to change the format a bit. By now we've gone through so many openings that you all should have a basic understanding for opening theory. So we're going to step up the game a bit. Instead of analyzing a certain variation over a couple of episodes, we'll pick a brilliant grandmaster's game and go through the opening that was played in that game. This way you'll get to see how it really looks, bringing theory to practice. So let's get to work. First up, we decided to pick the game between the Norwegian Grandmaster Magnus Carlsen and the Russian Grandmaster Alexander Grishuk. The game was played in the Tal Memorial Blitz earlier this year.
Magnus Carlsen won the game after finding a quite nice combination in the 31st move. A combination which even more extreme when you remember that Magnus found it in a Blitz game. But that combination is for you to check out at your earliest convenience, because we'll focus on the opening. Carlsen began the game, which would later transpose into the King's Indian by playing knight to f3, which was followed by knight to f6 and c4.
If we stop here for a while, we see that both parties have chosen to hide their intentions by playing versatile moves, which allows for alternations and transpositions. Instead of focusing on one line, they leave the door open for a lot of different continuations. This is of course not always preferable, especially if you yourself are static when it comes to openings. If openings are one of your weak points, there is really no point in giving your opponent a chance to play your weakness.
From here the game continued with g6, knight to c3, bishop to g7, e4, d6, d4, castle kingside, bishop to e2, e5 and bishop to e3. We are now knee-deep into the very popular and aggressive King's Indian, a variation which often leads to extremely aggressive games, where black pushes his pawns on the king side, while white does the same on the queen side.
But what will we see today deviates a bit from that description, since Grishuk here chose to lighten up the pressure in the center by capturing on d4. This changes the outlook of the game completely. It shifts the center of action from the flanks to the center, and Carlsen chose to continue with the natural knight takes on d4, after which rook to e8 followed, putting pressure on the e4 pawn, and after white's f3, the entire e-file becomes a weakness, especially the bishop on e3.
Because of this, black prepares for d5 by playing c6. The white bishop has to move, and Carlsen chose to put it away on f2. It's possible to keep the bishop on e3 by playing queen to d2. This would be followed by d5, e takes on d5, c takes on d5, castle king side, knight to c6, and c5. An interesting continuation follows after rook captures on e3. This puts the knight, queen, and king on a nice diagonal, especially considering the black bishop on g7.
At this point, there is no direct way to win, and because of this, black should focus on the weak white pawn on c5 with queen to f8, and after knight to c to b5 and queen takes on c5, I would say that black has the more comfortable position, especially in a blitz game, wouldn't you say?
Well, yes. Carlsen avoided this line by playing bishop to f2, and against this, Grishuk answered with d5. This requires white to capture on d5, and since the e-pawn is the weaker pawn in this position, white should capture with it. And after black's recapture, Carlsen chose to play castle kingside.
This position is fairly open in the center, and while black might seem to have the initiative, he also has an inferior piece development, evening the scales out. If you want to see how a game might develop from this position, I recommend you to take a look at the game between Carlsen and Grishuk. And when you reach move 31, take a break and try to find the combination which won Carlsen the game. Pure brilliance. But with that, we end the opening school, so see you next time.
In the moralizing Swedish cartoon strip from the 50s, Spara och Slösa, which was about the two sisters with the symbolically over-explicit names Frugal and Lavish, respectively, generations of kids in Sweden were taught about the importance of being thrifty. Machiavelli emphasizes the long-term advantages of being thrifty in the chapter about thriftiness and generosity of The Prince. But the context in which he analyzes these traits is somewhat more complicated than the one in the cartoon, and one of these factors is power through reputation. In the cartoon that was meant to encourage children to be thriftier, this question was not asked. But who of the two sisters do you think was more popular in school? The cool one with all the new stuff, or the precautious one? Machiavelli begins with confirming that it's better to be considered being generous than being a cheapskate, and that it's important to act to get such reputation by, for example, not hesitating when spending large sums of resources. The advantages of generosity are clear in chess, because even if there are good and bad sacrifices, of course, we all know of Anderson's chess game against Kieseritzky that has gone down to history as the immortal game. Anderson sacrificed nearly all of his pieces to, in the end, with a queen sacrifice, checkmate his opponent. Not only did that game give him the prize for playing the tournament's most beautiful chess game, but imagine his reputation after that game. Every chess player he ever played against after that must have been terrified to not be the next victim in the sequel, the immortal game 2. And in the most rational game of chess, feelings such as fear are not good. But a reputation of being generous doesn't come for free. The one that wants to keep that reputation has to spend enormous amounts of resources, and for a prince to be able to do that, he has to burden the people with extraordinary taxes. This means that the prince, in the long run, will be hated by everyone, the subjects or taxpayers of course, but after some time also by all the others, because as the prince gets poor, no one will like to work for him. No, instead Machiavelli claims that thriftiness can give a leader a reputation of being generous in the long run. Because when the resourceful prince eventually decides to use his resources and succeeds, everyone he has not taken anything from will look up to him, as he with his success will appear as generous. There is only one case in which a prince has to be generous, or rather unsparing, and that is when he spends resources that are neither his or his subjects. During, for example, a conquering expedition, a prince must show his power by spending if he wishes to be followed. Although the cartoon about the sisters Spar och Slösa is one of greatest cultural importance in Sweden, Swedish politicians and administrative authorities seem to have not been catching up on their reading. While the economic situation hasn't been in top in Sweden or in the world, the taxpayers' hard-earned money have been used for the authorities' lavish festivities. Several scandals were recently exposed in Sweden of this nature, but the funniest one of them is the security police's James Bond-themed party, even if it cost almost $1 million. So what have we learned from this? Well, beside this sort of funny fact that the Swedish security police seem to enjoy pretending to be James Bonds, maybe the politicians should take a look in the Machiavelli, the prince, to learn a thing or two about the risks of being too wasteful before they order their next extravagant party for millions of tax kronors.
So then it's finally time for our Chess Tactics Challenge here on Chess TV, and even though we've had a break here on Chess TV, I really hope you have been keeping all your skills from the last season fresh over the summer. So to kickstart this season, I have chosen a rather tricky chess puzzle with a checkmate in 3 moves. You know how this works now. You have 1 minute to find the checkmate in 3 moves. Good luck. If we start by analyzing the position, we see that white is a piece down, but has in return gotten a very strong attack against the black king. White has even had time to castle and thus securing the king's safety, which should be compared with the black king's vulnerable position. The bishop, the knight and the queen have all created great pressure on the king, and the challenge is to exploit this and checkmate the king in 3 moves. And please also note that the black king is in this position, can't go anywhere. The knight guards f8 and the bishop guards f7. If we imagine that the knight wasn't standing on g6, we see that the queen is checking the king. But this also means that the black knight on g7 easily can capture the checking queen. The same thing also applies in this situation, even though we would capture the knight on e7 or the rook on h8. Our queen is thus threatened, and we can just exclude all variations where we sacrifice her. We simply need the queen to finish this game, especially given that we already are a bishop down. Now, I assume that you all have already begun to explore the potential for a double check in this position. That is, moving the knight to a square when it checks at the same time as the king is checked by the queen. But we can also quite quickly see that the knight simply just can't jump to a square from which he can check the king, at least not now. So if we don't check with the knight or the queen, our b3 bishop is the only remaining piece in that option. So let's check with it on f7. The king can only respond by capturing the checking piece, and now we need to note that the situation has changed radically in comparison with the position only 1 move earlier. The king is certainly left in the queen's diagonal, but what we can do now is to jump with the knight to e5 with a double check. The king has 3 options. e6, f8 and g8. If the king goes to g8, we can play queen f7 checkmate, as we also do on king to f8. If the king goes to e6, however, we have two different checkmate moves. Either we play knight to f7 checkmate, or why not knight to c4 checkmate. And with this little tactical finesse, it's time for Professor Arne Johansson in the chess historical section, and he will connect the Danish court with chess. So here we go.
Welcome back to the chess history section of the program. Today I will try to find connections between a Danish art collection, the Danish king Christian VII, the Swedish author P.O. Enquist, and chess. It sounds a bit complicated, but I hope I will manage to convince you about the connections. During the summer I took a chance to visit Denmark and enjoy some fine art in Copenhagen, where there was a big Matisse exhibition and an exhibition of Skagen paintings at the Hirschsprung Museum. But what really caught my attention was a painting in the regular Hirschsprung collection that I will soon return to. To start with, I can reveal that it was a painting from 1873 by Christian Zartmann, who looked like this according to Wikipedia, and is a famous Danish painter known, among other things, for portraits of legendary women in Danish history. The main person in the present painting is the Danish queen Caroline Mathilde, accompanied by the king Christian VII and his personal physician, etc., Johan Friedrich Struensee. It was painted in 1873, but the scene, that contains a lot of symbolism, is thought to have occurred about 100 years earlier, probably during 1771. To understand the symbolics in the painting, one must know a little about the Danish history and the fact that Christian VII suffered from some kind of mental illness, which was actually well known at that time. From Caroline Mathilde's perspective, it was therefore a rather distressing marriage, but they had a son who consequently became the crown prince and subsequently King Frederick VI. What about Struensee then? Well, he grew up in an upper-class family in Germany and got a doctoral degree in medicine. He was also eagerly interested in the Enlightenment ideals and ideas from people like Rousseau. He came in contact with the Danish court, and to make a long story short, he became the personal physician to King Christian VII. But it didn't stop at that. He used his position to convince the king to introduce reforms along the Enlightenment ideals. Well, it didn't stop there either. To start with, the queen disliked the ambitious doctor, but after some time he even became her lover. As a parenthesis, we can mention that Struensee also got a strong influence on the upbringing of the Crown Prince Frederick, and Struensee employed one of Rousseau's more odd ideas, namely that cold was good for the fostering of a child. For that reason, Frederick was seen to walk around half naked both during summers and winters, something he at least seems to have survived. Struensee's ambitions didn't stop at becoming the advisor to the king and the queen's lover. After a while, he simply took over power from the king and became de facto regent of Denmark during a period of somewhat more than a year. He took the chance to suggest about 1,000 different reforms during that time, among other things to abolish death penalty for theft. Many suggested reforms finally became realized, but a number of them were perhaps not so well formulated. The opinion turned against him, and it was considered as a crime against the Danish throne to have an affair with the queen, an affair that also resulted in a daughter. The irony of fate is perhaps the fact that when he abolished the censorship of the press, it resulted in a stream of uncensored but very negative articles about himself. His position became impossible, and on January the 17th, 1772, he and Enevold Brandt, whom I will not discuss here, were arrested. After a trial, they were convicted and sentenced to first have their right hand cut off and thereafter to be executed. On Wikipedia one can find this sketch of Struensee's arrest. Well, Struensee's days were thereby over and the queen was driven in exile. But let's return to that painting in Copenhagen. This is what it looks like. We can see the mad king lying in the sofa, playing with a sword directed towards a parrot, while Caroline Mathilde plays chess with her lover Struensee. It is actually likely that she knew how to play chess, but here the struggle of the power between the white and the red kings also has a strong symbolic meaning. Well, now it only remains for me to also connect this story to the Swedish author P.O. Enquist. Well, he has actually written a novel that has borrowed the main theme from precisely this strange period of the Danish history. The book looks like this and is called A Visit of the Royal Physician. It starts in translation with, on the 5th of April 1768, Johan Friedrich Struensee was employed as a personal physician to the Danish King Christian VII and was executed 4 years later. End of quote. As an extra addition, I can also mention that the Danish National Archives have an exhibition this fall with the title Struensee, Love, Madness and Idealism in the 18th Century. And there is also a new film with the title A Royal Affair with Mats Mikkelsen as Struensee. So this little cultural excursion turned out to fit well into the current cultural interests. But with that we end for today, but we'll return again with a new theme in the next program. So see you then.
Well then, thank you all for watching this episode of Chess TV. We'll be back again with a new episode on the 1st of October. So see you then. Bye!